There are diplomatic consultations behind the scenes to try and ensure the de-escalation of tension between South Africa and Rwanda. This comes after Rwandan President Paul Kagame issued a hard-hitting statement in response to Pretoria's explanation on what happened in the eastern DRC, where the SANDF lost 13 members. There was a glimmer of hope in April 2024 that relations between South Africa and Rwanda were on the mend when President Cyril Ramaphosa was invited to Kigali and met his Rwandan counterpart during the 30th anniversary of the Rwandan genocide. And this is what Ramaphosa said about that meeting.
We did speak about the challenges that are prevailing now as a result of the situation in the eastern part of the DRC, and how both countries, in fact, how the region, SADC, can work towards installing peace. We all agreed that peace was an essential component of fostering the development of this part of the continent, and that in doing so we should bring the conflicts that are happening in the eastern part of the DRC to an end. And also whatever actions that are going on to also destabilize Rwanda through the incursions of the FDLR. So there are a number of forces that operate in this area, and we agreed that a peaceful political solution is the best option to any military action. And beyond discussing with President Kagame, I also had a number of discussions with a number of other leaders. I also had a very good discussion with President Mbeki, who was also attending the commemoration, and we discussed the situation in the eastern DRC. I went on to have discussions with other leaders from other countries, and all of us in our discussions expressed a very deep yearning for a peaceful political solution to the challenges that are being faced here. So I leave Rwanda with a renewed vigor and intention that we should find a solution that will lead to a political solution to what is prevailing here. The people of DRC yearn for peace, and similarly the people of Rwanda also yearn for peace. And so therefore, all of us combined, including SADC, should work towards installing peace in this area, so that the conflicts and the violent conflicts, the displacement of people in the DRC and indeed in Rwanda should come to an end, so that there should be peace and silence the guns in this part of our continent. So that is what we are hoping and aiming for.
And here is Kagame's strongly worded statement dismissing South Africa's assertion that Ramaphosa warned him against attacking South African Defence Force members deployed in the DRC.
He got rid of them and he decided to bring in SADC. SADC was, without any question, coming to assist Tshisekedi to fight alongside FDLR, these murderers of our people here in this country, to fight against mercenaries, and to have Burundi on ethnic political basis decide to support Tshisekedi in whatever endeavor, including exactly doing what those murderers did to our people and what they are doing in Eastern Congo, They have displaced people, they have killed people, they have persecuted them on a daily basis for who they are. We have refugees here who have been here for the last 20 plus years, just dislocated from Congo and sent to Rwanda because they say these are ethnic Tutsis, and therefore they belong to Rwanda, they don't belong there. And everybody is around. I don't know how many entities we have in Congo, honestly. We have MONUSC, we have SAMI DRC, we have mercenaries, we have Burundi, we have FDLR that has joined them. And everybody is there watching this thing, and we pretend it's like we don't understand what has been going on for all these years. And then when things like this of last week erupted, we behave like we are surprised or we are concerned about humanitarian crisis, about this and that. Isn't persecuting and killing people and displacing them part of that humanitarian concern? So as East Africans, we sit here and then do what about it?
Sophie Mokoena, SABC News International Editor, and Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News Correspondent, join us to further explore this discussion. Good afternoon to you both, and thank you so much for your time. Sophie, I'm going to start with you. There was that glimmer of hope, as we said earlier on, that South Africa and Rwanda were on the mend. And then yesterday we saw that the statement by the president speaking about what was happening, reacting to that. And then hours later, a very strongly worded statement that was penned by President Paul Kagame. What happened?
Well, as you pointed out, it looks like President Kagame was talking particularly to the East Africa community. As you know, that last night there was this meeting convened by the President of Kenya, William Ruto, who is the chair of that bloc. And therefore, he was actually talking about what has happened in the DRC, in the Great Lakes region, or in East Africa. And therefore, in that discussions, it looks like he was sending a message in terms of also rebutting what was in the statement released yesterday by Pretoria in relation to where they were talking about the latest, including what ministers said during that press briefing, particularly during question and answer sessions. But the reality is, this tension between Rwanda and the DRC has been there for a long time. Many people have indicated that the only solution is for DRC and Rwanda to talk. But unfortunately, much as there were agreements some years back in terms of what needs to be done, those documents that were signed were not implemented, the content thereof, including recently, last year, the Rwanda document that spoke to what needs to be done. But perhaps let's take a listen at what the Minister of Communications of the DRC, that is Kinshasa, had to say earlier on SABC in terms of this issue, because President Kagame is talking about the history of this conflict. But you look at DRC, Kinshasa, they also have a perspective. Let's hear what the Minister of Communications in the DRC had to say about that conflict.
First, we would like to express our condolences to the South African Republic because of your soldier who passed away here in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We would like to express our gratitude to President Ramaphosa and all the people from South Africa for the continuing support since the beginning of this conflict. If I have to speak briefly about this conflict, the main reason is that the President Kagame for the past 30 years used eastern part of DRC as the place he can bring trouble so he can make sure he's controlling mineral resources, which is used to build his economy in Rwanda. That's the first reason. The second reason, the President Kagame used a lot of pretext, saying that in Democratic Republic of Congo, we are doing what we can call cleansing, ethnic cleansing, especially against Tutsi. He seems to be the protector of this community by killing others' community. What we can say on that in DRC, we don't have any kind of hate speech. We are a country with more than 450 tribes. We speak different language, and we all are united behind the president, and we know the way we share our values. In DRC, there is no discrimination. Just to give you an example, we have the infrastructure minister is a Tutsi, and a lot of top generals are from this community. This is just the pretext the President Kagame been using for years. The second pretext he's been using was in DRC, we have what we call FDLR. Just to give you the context, in 1994, after the genocide, the international community requested the government of Zaire at that moment to host refugees. We received more than 1 million people fleeing from Rwanda because of the conflict, and some of them come 31 years later with weapons, etc. They've been the soldier of the President Habyarimana. Since that period, the President Kagame started to use that reason to come to do what he's doing in the eastern part of DRC. We've been fighting them. We fighted them with the president during the President Kabila's period, for instance, during the President Tshisekedi, for instance. So we know both intelligence in different countries. We've been working to tackle this threat, which is really not, because the President Kagame has to remind himself that those FDLR are first Rwanda. They deserve to live in their country. But is the pretext he keeps using to attack eastern part of DRC. Yeah. That's the same. He's been saying that in DRC, there is, in Rwanda, there is Congolese refugees for years, and DRC should take back those refugees here in DRC. What you have to know on that question first, that there is more Rwandan refugees in DRC than DRC Congolese refugees in Rwanda. Even on that question, we've been around the High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva to set the plan to solve the issue. And if I have to come back from what we have seen in the past days, on December 15, around the President Lorenzo, we should be finished with the reason of this conflict.
And that is the communications minister there in the DRC. Sherwin, let me bring you into this conversation. We, are listening to a number of acronyms that continue to be thrown around when it comes to this particular story. There would be your FDLR, and then you hear about SADC, MONUSCO. Then you hear of a Force Intervention Brigade. Let's talk about the differences, between these and the mandates.
Well, let's take a step back, Bongiwe, and understand what traditional peacekeeping looks like. Traditional peacekeeping is essentially peacekeepers under a mandate given by the Security Council, or in the instances of SADC or other regional groups, they get a mandate, and usually that mandate tends to be focused on the protection of civilians, help with Security Council, security sector reform, helping bolster a country's judicial system, human rights monitoring and reporting, disarmament, demobilization, reintegration and stabilization. And so understand that peacekeeping doesn't only refer to military boots on the ground. There are also civilian personnel that help to create a transition, often in circumstances where there is an agreement in place between two warring parties. But what we've seen subsequently in the last decades is that often the complication with peacekeeping is that there is no peace to keep. So you mentioned an outfit like the Force Intervention Brigade. This was an exceptional circumstance authorized by the UN Security Council in 2013 to augment the traditional role of a defensive posture of MONUSCO by giving the FIB, which comprises of South African contingents, an offensive posture. So peacekeeping is very much about the mandate given to it, and what the Security Council decided in 2013 is to create an offensive force known as the Force Intervention Brigade, which will fall under the force commander of MONUSCO, to contribute to the objective of reducing the threat posed by armed groups to state authority and civilian security, and to make space for for stabilization activities either unilaterally or jointly with the Congolese security forces. Then you get a SAMI DRC force, which was authorized by the regional bloc in 2024. And this is what SADC's documents say about the posture of this force, right? I know that the word UN peacekeeping has been used very loosely to describe all these forces as peacekeeping, and that is not necessarily wrong, but this is a peacekeeping force not with a defensive posture, but with an offensive posture. So the deployment of SAMI DRC is in accordance with the principles of collective self-defense and collective action outlined in the SADC Mutual Defense Pact of 2003. The pact emphasizes that, quote, any armed attack perpetrated against one of the state's parties shall be considered a threat to regional peace and security and shall be met with immediate collective action. So essentially, an offensive mandate to engage in direct combat with armed groups. As part of SAMI DRC, this is returning to the SADC documentation, the SADC regional force from the republics of Malawi, South Africa and Tanzania and elements of the DRC armed forces are working with the Congolese army in fighting armed groups, operating in the eastern DRC. President Kagame also in his statement refers, and let me just get it up here, he refers to SAMI DRC displaced a true peacekeeping force, the East African community. Let me just read you quickly what the East African community, whose mandate wasn't renewed by President Tshisekedi, was appointed in 2022. Its mandate wasn't renewed in 2023. The East African community's mandate says this: jointly plan and conduct operations with the armed forces of the Democratic Republic of Congo to defeat armed group elements in the eastern DRC. So when President Kagame says this was a true peacekeeping force, he doesn't mean that in the traditional sense of a defensive posture. The EAC forces also had an offensive posture akin to what you are seeing from SAMI DRC and the Force Intervention Brigade. So peacekeeping is very complex, right? So you can have a defensive posture and offensive posture, and what you're seeing from groups like the FIB, the Force Intervention Brigade, what you're seeing from outfits like SAMI DRC, and what you saw from the EAC regional force is an offensive posture, which allows them then to coordinate with the DRC army in fighting these armed groups. So that's what they were sent there for. So let's not use the, when we talk about peacekeeping, it can become very confusing, but sometimes the postures differ based on the defensive mandate or an offensive mandate, and the offensive mandate is what applies in terms of SAMI DRC and what you're seeing evolving against M23 in Eastern DRC today.
And Sherwin, of course, that, really just succinctly, really gives us a sense of what's going on there. But you also look at what has been taking place, Sherwin, in the UN Security Council. Rwanda's representative, for example, speaks about the deteriorating situation in the Eastern DRC and says there's only one immediate cause, and I quote, the obsession by the president of the DRC for a military solution and thirst for a regime change in Rwanda. And then the DRC's foreign affairs minister says Rwanda's actions constitute crimes against humanity and continue with impunity in areas like Goma. And when you listen to all of this that's coming out from there, there's clearly a very dire need to deal with the situation on the ground, given also the displacement of a number of people as well.
But also understand the broader context here. These kinds of conversations are not new. The UN peacekeeping mission has been in the DRC. Before MONUSCO, there was something called MONUC. MONUC was appointed and authorized by the UN Security Council in 1999. This just tells you how complicated it is to bring peace to this region, despite the regional efforts, despite the international community's efforts, and despite the regional forces that are being sent in there often, where the barometer for failure is far higher than the yield you are getting in terms of success. And so that is a hard lesson that the SANDF is learning in a very complicated arena where you have hundreds of armed groups. You talk about M23. M23 is but one of the hundreds of armed groups operating in DRC. And as you mentioned, right, the various acronyms. You have the SADC, which is the Congolese army. You have MONUSCO. You have FIB. You have SAMI DRC. You have the FDLR, which Rwanda views as a genocidal force that escaped the Rwanda Tutsi response to the genocide in Rwanda in 1994 escaped into Congo. And Rwanda accuses the DRC army, the FARDC, SADC force, of collaborating with this genocidal force in eastern DRC, and what the Rwandans are viewing as constituting a security threat to Rwanda. That's kind of where the regime change narrative is emanating from Rwanda's ambassador, as he presented in the Security Council this week. So Rwanda views this collaboration between SAMI DRC, the FDLR, the FARDC, and Burundi's forces, among others, as constituting a security threat to Rwanda. And if you look at a map, if you look how close Goma is, essentially right on the border with Rwanda. And so, you have an ethnic dimension, a spillover across the border between both sides. You'll have Tutsis in Congo, Tutsis in Rwanda, Hutus on either side. And that is the complication when you talk about the ethnic dimensions to this conflict. So it is extremely complicated. Rwanda views this as a threat. The South Africans are saying we are there to, infuse this conflict with a peace dynamic, to bring a restoration of peace and stability in support of the sovereign authority of the DRC government that invited them to come in here. But as you are hearing, different views from the different leaders, Ramaphosa on the one end, Kagame on the other hand, what you need to follow here is the Luanda process, mediated by Angola's president here, to get signatures in terms of that ceasefire agreement that was already basically on the table since August last year.
And Sophie, briefly then, when you look at and listen to what Sherwin is talking about, and what we've been talking about this entire week, is how complex this is. And then you have the EAC at the same time saying that to President Felix Tshisekedi, you now need to engage all the stakeholders, including the M23. And this is a gathering he snapped yesterday. So how then do you begin to ensure that there's lasting solution here, given what also we are expecting as that emergency summit as well tomorrow by SADC?
That document they signed in South Africa in Sun City is the best document that can guide all stakeholders to arrive at a better solution. You have to ensure that you are inclusive when you negotiate peace. You have to ensure that you are sober. You have to ensure that you have no interest. And therefore, you'll be able to engage all stakeholders. And as you pointed out, we had the Minister of Communications of DRC saying that you have Tutsis in DRC, you have Tutsis in Rwanda, you have also Hutus, both sides. Now, you have refugees in Rwanda, people fleeing from DRC because of the internal dynamics. You have people in DRC who left DRC because of the tension that played itself in 1994. Now, clearly, all these sides, they would want to make their voices heard. And therefore, you have to make sure that you are very, very sober in your approach to bring them to the negotiating table. The EAC statement is saying, let's bring everybody on the table and let us talk. We are waiting to hear what SADC is going to say tomorrow, because you have the SADC meeting. But I think the president of Rwanda is also going to call for an inclusive dialogue.
All right, let me thank you both for your time. That's Sophie Mokoena, the SABC News International Editor, and Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News Correspondent, joining us for this conversation.